What we plan to discuss today is about the prime numbers, and there are essentially two reasons why I want to discuss about the prime numbers. One of the reason is that this being a place for the information technology, which essentially means that most of you would have come across the prime numbers at some context or other, and you would like to know what more what is that one has to know about the prime numbers in order to use it in the information technology. Therefore, that's one essential reason, and that part I would probably relegate to the second half of my lecture. The other reason is what you might have seen as somebody proving a great result about the prime numbers in all the web and all your internet and the newspapers. You would have said that there's a guy who has proved some great result about the prime numbers. First of all, at the outset, let me say that whatever that great result which he has proved all prime numbers is completely useless for cryptology, and therefore if you are thinking that he has proved something on prime numbers and what effect it will have on cryptology, the answer is no. But in any case, one should probably know if every newspaper even talks about a certain result which somebody has proved, then probably you should know what the result is all about. What is it pure? And therefore that is the second reason, and therefore that will be the first part of my lecture. Therefore the result of SAN. Therefore now let me put this result of SAN in the proper context first. Therefore now we have the prime numbers. And the prime numbers have been studied even from the time of Euclid. And Euclid essentially he was the first one who proved that every integer can be written as a product of prime numbers uniquely, and then he proved that there are infinitely many primes and so on and so forth. But all those things were essentially about what one should say is about special properties of the prime numbers. But the question of the distribution of prime numbers, people started studying only around in the 16th century. Okay, it started with Euler and Gauss and Riemann and others. They started studying what will be the distribution of prime numbers. In particular, one would like to know the following questions. Is there a formula for the nth prime? And if the answer is no, an approximate formula for the nth prime. Nth prime we will call Pn. Now that's one of the questions which I would like to know, particularly in cryptology, when you are looking at an RSA and various things like that, and most of the time then you will come across a statement saying that take a 1024 bit prime number, and that's where we will start, and leaving you wondering how do you anyway get a 1024 bit prime number. I mean, it's not something which is available somewhere, you just go and pick 1024 bit number. How do people have this 1024 bit number? Therefore, the natural question that you would like to know is probably is there a formula, and you put in the formula and then it gives you the prime number. But if the answer is no, then of course the computer scientists are not interested, but the mathematicians would be interested in knowing at least is there an approximate formula, which is equivalent to asking is there an exact formula or an approximate formula for pi of n, which is the number of primes of Pn. Therefore, you would like to know whether there is an exact formula or an approximate formula for pi of n, which is the number of primes of Tn. The point is, there is no exact formula known for pi of n, and no exact formula is expected to be there. There's no. That is because if you have an exact formula, that would mean in some sense you would expect the distribution of primes to be somewhat uniform. No, because that's an exact formula for nth prime and n plus 1th prime, it would be the same. But you don't expect the distribution of prime numbers to be that uniform, which is one of the things of the Zhang's result, and therefore I will come to that little later. And therefore, let's see what are the things which are known anyway. Therefore, the theorem which is known, which is the so-called prime number theorem, which says that the number of primes of n is around n over square, n over logarithm of n. That is the so-called prime number theorem. And I should warn that this logarithm is a mathematician's logarithm and not a computer scientist logarithm, which means that it is to the base e and not to the base 2. Okay? And in fact, mathematicians would prefer to write phi of n asymptotic to this particular integral. Okay, and one can prove actually that these two formulas are asymptotic to each other. The integral 2 to n dt by log t is asymptotic to n over log n, and the reason why we would prefer to write as 2 to n dt by log t is because this difference is much smaller than this difference. Therefore, this becomes a much better approximation. Integral 2 to n dt by log t turns out to be a much better approximation to the number of primes of Tn compared to n over log n. Okay? And in fact, the following theorem is known. Phi of n is equal to this dt of t plus what we will call order of n into exponential minus c times the square root of log n. Which means that the error term is worse than the main term by any power of logarithm. Therefore, this difference between the main term and the error term is bounded by n over any power of logarithm of n. Therefore, this is what is prime number theorem. But there is something more. There is something more. There is something called the Riemann hypothesis. The Riemann hypothesis by itself is a statement about the zeros of a certain analytic function, where those zeros will lie there and so on and so forth. Where the zeros of a certain analytic function lies. But on the other hand, that this particular hypothesis seems to have a large impact on the distribution of prime numbers. And it has so much of an impact on the distribution of prime numbers like phi of n. Therefore, under Riemann hypothesis, one can actually prove that phi of n equal to this plus order of n power half plus epsilon, which is what you would normally expect, because whenever you have such a formula, then you would expect that the error term will be essentially the square root of the main term. That is what would happen in most of the situations. Okay. Now, on the other hand, I was saying that the prime numbers are not distributed that well. Okay. Therefore, for example, I want to say, suppose you see up to n, there are around n over log n primes, which essentially means that the average gap of primes is around log n. If you put n over log n elements from 1 to n, if you randomly put 1 over log n over log n elements from 1 to n, then the average gap between any two such elements will be logarithm of n. and as n tends to infinity, logarithm of n tends to infinity, which essentially means that the difference will go to really infinity. Okay. Now, of course, that's we know. But now I want to know what is the maximum gap, which means now and then. You see, once, even though I know that on the average the difference is around logarithm of n, okay, occasionally what would happen is that the average will be much bigger than logarithm of n, around n, and occasionally it would happen that the average is much smaller than around log n. Okay, because it will always be uniformly log n difference. Sometimes a little less and sometimes a little more and so on and so forth. Therefore, the question is occasionally again, how big the difference can become. Okay? And now that's the theorem that occasionally the difference can be logarithm of n into log n into log n divided by log n. Which is something which is log n multiplied by something which goes to infinity, remember. Log n multiplied by something which goes to infinity because it is log n times log n into log n divided by log n. Therefore, it log n times infinity, and therefore sometimes the difference can be as big as around infinite times the average value. Good. Now, how small can it be? That's an intellectual question. Therefore, now if you look at the difference, how small it can be. See, average distance is log n, it should be smaller than that, etc. Now, suppose you take a certain thing and distribute it in such a way that within 1 to n over log n of them fall in this interval. That's how you are distributing it, some sort of a Poissonian distribution. And then in such a case, what would you expect to be the minimal distance? Okay. The standard argument would say the minimal distance will be probably something like a square root of log n. Therefore, what you would do, just on this you would expect that probability is a square root of log n. But then there were people like Gauss who were really interested doing a lot of calculations even without a computer to really make to understand what is going on, and therefore they really calculated the prime numbers to a long distance, and then they observed that the primes with a difference of 2 like 1113 or 1719 or 5961, difference of 2 they seem to observe now and then when they did the calculated the prime all the way. Therefore, when they calculated the prime all the way, they were able to observe the difference of 2. Therefore, the question is, therefore, in spite of what would you expect on the probability consideration, namely it is square root of log n, probably the difference, there are a bounded difference infinitely often. Probably there are two primes within a bounded difference, probably even 2. Okay? Therefore, now we make a conjecture. probably Pn plus 1 minus Pn is a bounded number. That probably happens infinitely often. Even though the average distance is log n, therefore the average distance cannot be bounded. Okay, but two consecutive primes, their difference being bounded, happening lot of times, maybe little rarely though, but lot of times probably could happen. And in fact, here we don't prove it, and therefore once we are not going to prove it, we can make even a stronger conjecture. Okay, the stronger conjecture is that Pn plus 1 minus Pn equal to 2 happens infinitely often. Again, you have no idea. Therefore, you can even make a conjecture. Given any k, Pn plus 1 minus Pn equal to 2 times k happens infinitely often. Therefore, infinitely many times you will be able to see two consecutive primes with a difference of 2, then consecutive primes with a difference of 4, two consecutive primes with a difference of 6 and so on. Okay, that's the conjecture. Okay?
Why does this feeling come that there can be infinity of them?
Just for the numerical example. Earlier than that, there was nothing. Okay, just purely based upon the numerical example. I mean, as much as you calculate, then you seem to be getting it. Okay. And then what happened was, then later there is a certain. Okay. Okay, now. See, earlier all the number theoretic questions are essentially about a single prime rather than the distribution, and about the single prime, therefore the theorems would be essentially proved by combinatorial methods. Then it came to the distribution, and for the distribution, Riemann wrote essentially only one paper in number theory, where he proved the prime number theorem, and that is by essentially using complex analysis. And that therefore turned out to be a very powerful method to solve such problems, and therefore that was rather well developed later by various people including Hardy and Davenport, Vinogradov and so on. But Hardy was the forefront of that. Meantime, by a slightly different combinatorial technique called sieve methods, Viggo Brun proved a great result, for which for some strange reason Hardy even did not believe that such a result could be true at all, because he didn't expect that this is great result coming from any source other than complex analysis. He was so fixed upon complex analysis that anything nice in number theory can be proved only by using complex analysis and no other method. And therefore, friends, Viggo Brun proved something else by using combinatorial method. He even didn't believe it, but anyway, Viggo Brun did manage to prove it, and that method, which is called sieve method, which was developed later by many people, and under a certain natural conjectures which one could make on sieve methods, it looks like that this conjecture can be actually made, and in fact you can even count how many of them are there. Okay, therefore up to x, how many such Pn should be there such that Pn plus 1 minus Pn equal to 2. You can count them, and you can even get an upper bound of that type unconditionally. Of course, lower bound is what we are interested in, proving that there is, which we don't know. Okay. Now, what is known is the question. Now, what is known? Let us say, for example, till around 2004. Yeah. Till 2004, what was known? And that's exactly now I went to this thing. Therefore, we are talking about the large gap, and then you were able to prove that the large gap was average gap times something which goes to infinity. And that is something what you would expect here also. You should be able to prove that the small gap is an average gap divided by something goes to infinity. Okay? And the fact is, till 2004, no such result was known. The best result that was known was C, I think it's 0.34 or something like that. The best result that was known was essentially saying that there are gaps which are at most 1/3 of the average gap. That's all. Therefore, whatever the result was not averaged by something which goes to infinity. Then, around 2004, 3 people proved a great result. Around 3004, Yildirim, Pitts, Goldstone, Pitts, Yildirim proved a great result. They proved that Pn plus 1 minus Pn is less than or equal to constant times square root of log Pn, but almost not that, little more, infinity of. Therefore, this is at least what you would expect from a probabilistic point of view. Probabilistic point of view, if the average length is log n, then probably the median length should be square root of log p, which is what we expect. And they proved just, and that already became a great result. I mean, because this is something which people didn't expect. And in fact, something else happened. Between 1985 and 1995, 3 people, Bombiri, Ivanik and Friedlander, attempted this problem, and they developed a very strong techniques to solve these problems. And they proved, therefore, a lot of results on this. But did not prove the final result. They proved a lot of result and saying that probably they may be useful for the final thing. And some great result again on sieve methods. They proved some great results on sieve methods towards this problem, but they did not prove anything regarding this particular problem, even though all their attempts were to solve this problem. Now something funny happens. This paper, this Goldstone-Pitts-Yildirim, write in their paper that if I am interested in this fact that Pn plus 1 minus Pn is less than 7 times some 10 power 17 infinitely often or something like that, bounded number, not too bad, but a bounded number. Pn plus 1 minus Pn is, if I want to know that it is a bounded number, which is already a great result, because square root of log Pn is what you would expect under the probability consideration. It is not even clear why it should be bounded. Okay, but then if you are thinking of trying to prove that this is a bounded number happens infinitely often, they write that we are almost on a hair's breadth between of just proving it. They were almost sure that they should be able to prove it, and they said that we are just missing a single point, we don't know how to do it, and otherwise we are there almost on that particular problem. And in fact they made a comment that probably their method combined with the method which was developed by Bombiri, Ivanik and Friedlander earlier 15 years back should probably give you the result. This particular result, that Pn plus 1 minus Pn is bounded infinitely often. And therefore that made a flurry of activities of these people, Bombiri, Ivanik and others, essentially to see whether their method would really be able to do that. And they did not succeed. But it so happens, the Zhang proved that the method of Goldstone-Pitts-Yildirim combined with the method of Bombiri, Ivanik, Friedlander actually gives exactly as they guessed this particular result. That is a theorem. That is a theorem about which you saw a lot in the newspapers.
What is the trick used for making it independent of n?
It's a very, very complicated thing.
Some
Go simple way you can no. Okay. Probably I can say exactly how I think I just one word about the proof, but not much, because the method of the proof is okay. The point is, therefore, what makes them work here is, see, the point is somehow, now take this, and now I am interested in something else now. I am interested in something else, which is pi of x a q, which means I am looking at those primes which are in the residue class A modulo q up to x. A is up to x in the residue class A modulo q, and the study of these primes also study of these primes turn out to be important for this paper. Okay, somehow you have to study, when you want to study about the difference between two primes, you have to study the distribution of primes in arithmetic progression. Okay, then of course, as you know, the distribution of primes in arithmetic progression is an interesting problem on itself, and this plays a major role. Now, what is the one can prove? The first thing is already Dirichlet proved. You see, one thing which you can clear, that this can admit a prime if and only if A and Q are co-prime. Because if A and Q have a common factor, then all the elements in this arithmetic progression A modulo Q will have the common factor, and therefore they cannot be primes. Okay, therefore A and Q have to be co-prime. And they directly observed that therefore, in some sense, therefore modulo Q, therefore the primes are there only in phi Q residue classes. And directly observed that the primes are equally distributed in all these phi Q residue classes. Therefore, already we know the total number of primes up to x is 2 to s dt by log t, and they all, therefore for a given residue class the number of primes would be 1 over p. That is the theorem of Dirichlet. Therefore the theorem of Dirichlet is
prime less than or equal to s, not a less than.
Oh, prime plus or equal to s. The number of primes up to x is 2 to x dt by log t, and Dirichlet observed that they are all equally distributed in all the residue classes. Now the next question which you would like to know is, what can you say about the difference? This difference is what is very important. And if Q is rather small, okay, now what are the theorems which are known? There are 3 theorems which are known. If the Q is rather small, is bounded by a power of log x, then the E, in fact you know it in the L infinity norm itself, the supranorm itself you can bound it. You can bound E in the supranorm itself. Okay. But on the other hand, if Q is less than x power half minus epsilon, then you cannot bound it in the supranorm, you can bound it in the L2 norm. And in any case, for any Q, you can bound it up to a constant times x over 1 over log x. This is not exactly correct. Yes. For any Q, you can bound it up to a constant. Therefore, any Q, the bound is up to a constant, the expected value, you will get a constant 2. But for Q less than or equal to x power half minus epsilon, the asymptotic formula holds. Asymptotic formula holds in the following sense, that if Q is up to x power half minus epsilon, then it is you cannot estimate it in the L infinity norm, but you can estimate it in the L2 norm. But if Q is much smaller, something like a log s power 100, you can even estimate it in the L infinity norm. And this particular theorem, that you can estimate it in the L infinity norm, is called Page-Siegel-Wallfisch theorem. That you can estimate it in this case in the L2 norm is called the Bombiri-Vinogradov theorem. And in any case you can estimate it up to a constant. This is called the Brun-Titmarsh theorem. And this Page-Siegel-Wallfisch theorem is proved using the so-called analytic methods. And the other two theorems are proved so-called sieve methods. And actually this is proved using this is proved using large sieve, and this is proved using small sieve. And this Bombiri Vinogradov, this Bombiri is the same as this Bombiri, Ivanik and Friedlander who tried this problem. Okay, and what was needed was to get this x power half times epsilon to half plus epsilon in order to prove the final theorem, Zhang's theorem. And unconditionally half plus epsilon, we don't really know how to prove it. But under certain conditions, we can prove this half plus epsilon, which is precisely what Zhang did. Therefore, in other words, he improved Bombiri's result, which Bombiri was trying to improve, which he could not do. And then he used the method of Ivanik, Friedlander and Bombiri to prove this result, which Ivanik, Friedlander and Bombiri were trying to prove, which they could not do. And just using that, therefore, the techniques were done essentially in some sense already. And then Zhang was able to finish that problem. And the very interesting part is that, of course, he sent it to the most prestigious journal, and Annals of Mathematics. And Annals of Mathematics sent it to a referee who happened to be Ivanik, and Ivanik refereed the paper just within 3 weeks. And the editors were wondering, how could you make this 3 weeks? He said, this is my paper. I mean, this is a problem which I have been working for last 10 years, and I know every step of it. And I am just wondering how I used this simple idea. It is there already. And therefore, this is a problem where he has been working, and therefore, when the new paper came, it was very easy. And his whole result, which he was trying to improve, with somebody else has improved, and therefore he could clearly see where the improvement comes and whether it is right or wrong, and was able to review the paper almost immediately. Therefore, that's it. If now people would start now from 7 to 10 power 7 to all the way up to 2, and therefore probably then it will keep on going like that, and finally probably in the next 20-30 years people will be able to prove that in fact Pn plus 1 minus Pn is equal to 2 itself has infinitely many solutions, and that is what is called the twin prime conjecture, and therefore a major step towards the proof of the twin prime conjecture has been taken. Okay, that finishes the first part of my lecture. Now let me go to the second part of my lecture. Good, yeah, I have time. Now, the second part, what do I want to talk? I want to talk about the question of the so-called primality testing. I mean, most of you would probably see that that you need a 1024-bit prime for the various purposes and so on and so forth, and you would always be wondering where one gets this prime. I mean, is there a formula, etc. And as I was telling, that there is really no formula at all, and therefore the question is, then how do you people get the primes? Yeah, actually it would have been very nice if there was a formula which, even if it does not give all the primes, but when you put an n, various values, it should give only primes. Even then, such a formula would be very good, because then you can take it and then keep on doing that, and then you, of course, you will get primes and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, no such thing. And in fact, the best example that is known is due to Euler again. That if you take n square plus n plus 41, and then when you put n equal to 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or say all the way up to 39, this gives you only prime numbers. And then when you take 40, of course, it fails. It doesn't give you prime numbers. Okay? And therefore, even to get some polynomial which will give you primes even for 40 consecutive numbers is very difficult. Okay. Therefore, what does one do? What one does is, okay, how do we choose a prime? Choose a random number and then hope it's a prime. That's all we do. Nothing more. Because there is nothing else which we can do. There is no way of constructing a prime number. And therefore what we do is we take a random number and hope that it's a prime number. Okay? And then if you want to be a little more careful, then you do the following. You take some tests which you know prime numbers will definitely pass. And some composite numbers also may pass. But not all composite numbers. I mean, if every number passes the test, that's useless. Then there is no test at all. Therefore, prime number should pass. Probably some composite number now and then may pass. Okay? And then see whether your number passes the test. If your number passes the test, you can say nothing. But if it fails the test, then you know it's not a prime number, you can throw it away. Okay? That's all. Therefore, now check whether your number passes the test. Check whether your number passes the test, and if your number passes the test, then you are very happy. No, you are not happy. Therefore, you don't know anything at this stage. But if it fails the test, then you can throw away the number and try the other number. Okay? Therefore, the question therefore is what you are interested in knowing is some such tests. Those tests are called so-called pseudo-primality tests. These tests are called the pseudo-primality tests, and this is what you are trying to do. Okay. Therefore, now let's talk about the some pseudo-primality tests. One such a test is a so-called, which you have already studied with various things, called the Fermat's Little theorem. Namely, if L is your given number, then you test whether a power n minus 1 is equal to 1 mod n. Because you know Fermat's Little theorem says that if n is a prime number, then you know that a power n minus 1 will be 1 mod n. Okay? If n is not a prime number, of course a power n minus 1 need not be 1 mod n. And therefore the prime numbers will all pass the test, because that is what the Fermat's Little theorem says. Okay? But some composite numbers may even pass the test, but not all composite numbers will pass the test. And in fact, one can prove, this is the theorem, probably give the dash. The number of composite numbers passing the test is less than or equal to the number of prime numbers appears. Therefore, the number of composite numbers passing in lattice is much smaller than the number of primes of TS. Therefore, if a number passes the test, then with a high probability it will better be prime number, because only very few composite numbers will pass the test. Okay. Therefore, what you can do is you can do it for 2. Therefore, it is 2 power n minus 1 is equal to 1 mod n. Whether it is true or not, check it. Suppose if it is true, then you check whether 3 power n minus 1 equal to 1 mod n. And then if it is true, then you check whether 5 power n minus 1 equal to 1 mod n. Etc. Okay. And probably you all would be thinking that probably these funny things like this Fermat-Little theorem were probably invented in order to use for cryptology later. But rather surprisingly, this was known to the ancient Chinese, and they even made a wrong conjecture. They made a wrong conjecture that the converse is true. They made a conjecture that if 2 power n minus 1 happens to be 1 mod n, then n has to be a prime. Therefore, that much they went. Okay, because they tried for the various things and for all composite and it failed, and therefore they thought that probably it should. Actually, it fails for some. There are composite numbers which will satisfy that. I will give you one example. Probably let's do some mathematics and see how this example comes. For example, you may take n is equal to 341, which it turns out to be 11 times 31. Okay. Then you know you look at 2 power 10. 2 power 10 is 1024, and that minus 1. Therefore, 2 power 10 minus 1 is equal to 1023. 1023 happens to be 11 times 3 times 31. Okay. What does that mean? That means the Fermat-Little theorem, 2 power 10 is 1 mod 11, because that is precisely what your Fermat-Little theorem says. Therefore, raising to the power 34, raised to the power 34, 2 power 340 equal to 1 mod 11. And then by actual verification, 2 power 10 equal to 1 mod 31, because I have calculated 2 power 10 minus 1 and 2 power 10 minus 1 happens to be 11 times 3 times 31, and then rising to the power 34, it happens 2 power 234 is 1 mod 31. Therefore, 2 power 340 minus 1 is divisible by both 11 and 31, and therefore it is divisible by 341, and therefore 2 power 340 is equal to 1 mod 341. Therefore, it satisfies Fermat-Little theorem. 341 satisfies the Fermat-Little theorem, but it is not a prime number, it is a composite number. Okay. But then it is not too difficult to find out 341.